Something's happening that's literally changing everything. For decades, Iran has been holding the entire world hostage. They've maintained an iron grip on the single most important energy choke point on the planet. But now, as of this moment, that trump card has just been permanently stripped away. Stick me to the very end of this video because I'm going to show you exactly how this war is literally changing the world, how the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and the United States are rewriting the map of global energy right before our very eyes, and how it promises to permanently defeat Iran and its terrorist proxies everywhere. Hey gang, it's me, Dr. Steve, your patron professor, here to help you make sense of the madness with breaking news and analysis you're not going to get anywhere else, so you know what to do. Make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. Also, with everything going on in the Middle East right now, moments like this are exactly why I created Patriot Alerts. I send you the real story on what matters most for your faith, family, and freedom before you hear it anywhere else. Click the link in the description. In 60 seconds, you're signed up. U.S. Central Command has just completed its 12th consecutive night of strikes against Iran late Wednesday. For nearly 2 straight weeks, American firepower has been raining down on Iran, and Wednesday night's barrage was no exception. U.S. Central Command unleashed another wave of strikes, smashing maritime capabilities, missile and drone storage depots, coastal surveillance sites, and air defense systems in one relentless push. CENTCOM is reporting that this campaign is systematically stripping Iran permanently of its ability to threaten civilian mariners, having already redirected 9 commercial vessels and disabled another just to keep the naval blockade airtight. Trump is drawing a hard red line, vowing to obliterate one bridge or power facility every single time Iran dares to target a vessel in the Strait of Hormuz. With more than 50,000 American troops locked in across the theater, this war shows zero signs of slowing down. However, against the backdrop of the bombs, the tankers, the blockade, the real story of this war might be happening underground, in pipelines and supply chain rerouting that nobody's even noticing. The Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, the state-owned oil and gas company of the United Arab Emirates, one of the largest energy companies on the planet, just confirmed that a brand new pipeline bypassing Hormuz entirely is already nearly 50% complete, and it's going to double export capacity at the port of Fujairah on the open ocean side of the UAE, with full operation targeted just months from now in early 2027. Now, this is technically the second pipeline that they would be building. The UAE has been running oil through a single pipeline to the port of Fujairah since 2012, moving roughly 1.5 million barrels a day, completely avoiding the strait. This new pipeline would, of course, at least double that capacity, and they're not alone. Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline, known as Petroline, transports crude oil roughly 750 miles from the eastern province oil fields to the Red Sea port of Yanbu, allowing exports to bypass the Strait of Hormuz entirely. Saudi officials say it can move as much as 7 million barrels per day, giving the kingdom a major strategic hedge against any Hormuz disruption or blockade. Now, alongside the UAE's pipeline network, it forms one of the Gulf's 2 primary bypass routes, though we should note that combined capacity still falls short of the roughly 20 million barrels per day that normally transits the strait. But if you combine that existing capacity with the new UAE expansion, you're looking at somewhere between 3 and 5.5 million barrels a day that can move without ever touching Hormuz. Again, still short of the roughly 20 million barrels a day that normally flowed through the strait before the war. But as it turns out, it's just the beginning. There's nothing less than an entire regional build-out happening in parallel, and the scale of it is absolutely staggering. Riyadh is now in preliminary talks to expand its east-west pipeline, Petroline, from 5 million up to a full 9 million barrels a day, alongside new Red Sea export terminals near the futuristic Nome development. There's also Iraq, which has been the most exposed nation in this entire crisis. Baghdad is now building its own 435-mile Basra to Haditha pipeline linking through Jordan, Syria, and Turkey, carrying up to 2.5 million barrels a day, backed by roughly $1.5 billion in new construction. On top of that, the UAE is planning an entirely new port and container terminal to rival Dubai's Jebel Ali, extending this bypass strategy beyond oil into general shipping and trade. And it's not just individual countries acting alone. The Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC itself, has now formally discussed accelerating joint regional infrastructure. So they're studying shared oil and gas pipeline networks, along with coordinated rail, electricity, and water interconnection projects across member states. Goldman Sachs estimates that if all of these projects come online as planned, Gulf producers could bypass the Strait of Hormuz entirely for up to 45% of pre-war export volumes by the end of 2027, and that figure climbs to 60% by 2028. So that's not a workaround. That's a wholesale re-architecture of how oil moves out of the Persian Gulf, permanently diminishing the one trump card Iran thought it could never lose. Now, of course, the legacy media is never going to tell you any of this. What they present is neutral reporting. It often steers perception instead of surfacing all the facts. Fortunately, millions are realizing that the news is broken, but they don't know where to turn for reliable news and information. Well, that's precisely where ground news comes in. Ground news pulls headlines from over 50,000 news sources and makes it easier to understand what's actually happening. You could see the political bias of each outlet, insights like reliability and outlet ownership, and how coverage breaks down across the spectrum. That's why over 1 million people have downloaded Ground News. Check it out for yourself at ground.news/Steve. My favorite feature is the blind spot feed. It shows you which stories are blowing up on one side of the aisle, but barely mentioned on the other. It's the clearest way to see media bias in action. So, for example, here's a story that's barely getting any traction on the left. It's about Democrat strategist James Carville totally ripping into the far-left socialists, destroying the Democrat Party. I mean, he's actually claiming the party is going to end up splitting apart. Isn't it interesting that the legacy media isn't making this a front-page story? Now, of course, the right has its own blind spots too, but now you'll know. With every story, Ground News shows you the entire spectrum of who's reporting from left, right, and center, how reliable each source is, and who owns each outlet. It's everything the corporate press doesn't want you to see. Right now, you can get 40% off the Vantage plan, which gives you unlimited access to all the features that I personally use for about $5 a month. Just visit ground.news/Steve, click the link in the description, or scan the QR code. That's ground.news/Steve. As it turns out, this re-architecture of the global oil supply chain in the Middle East doesn't complete the puzzle. Another oil exporter has arisen to take up the mantle, and that exporter is in our own backyard. American energy producers are cashing in on every bit of this realignment. U.S. crude oil exports hit a record 6.4 million barrels a day back in April, the highest level ever recorded by the EIA, the U.S. Energy Information Association. Total U.S. crude and petroleum product exports surged to a record 12.7 million barrels a day the same month, with the EIA confirming crude exports alone averaged 5.6 million barrels a day in April, 21% above the previous record. The week ending April 24th marked a genuinely historic moment. It was the first week in modern American history where the United States operated as a net exporter of crude oil. West Texas Intermediate, WTI, has ridden this entire wave. Every barrel that used to flow uncontested through Hormuz that now can't gets replaced by American oil, loaded onto tankers at ports like Corpus Christi and Houston, which together handled the lion's share of that record export surge. Corpus Christi alone had its busiest month in port history in March and its most active quarter ever. It's not just oil either. U.S. LNG exports broke their own record in March, climbing to 11.7 million metric tons as buyers who used to rely on Hormuz-dependent supply scrambled for American gas instead, with shipments to Asia more than doubling in a single month. And all of this is happening at the very same time that the United States has effectively seized control of the four major geopolitical choke points on the planet. So, of course, you got Panama. That started with literally his first day in office back in January 2025. The very first week back in office, Trump resecured the Panama Canal. Then you had the Strait of Gibraltar, which sits at the entrance to the Mediterranean Sea. That's a deal Trump struck with Morocco, which is now part of the Abraham Accords. And then he got the Strait of Malacca. That links the Indian Ocean with the South China Sea, and where 80% of China's imports inevitably have to sail through. And now, of course, Hormuz, with Trump even threatening to charge a toll for all ships going through the straits. So the United States now has effective control of four of the most important maritime choke points on the planet that account for nearly 50% of all the world's trade and oil access. And so putting it all together, the architecture of the world's oil supply chain has already completely changed. The Gulf nations are done depending on Iran's good behavior to move their own oil and market. They're completely bypassing Hormuz, combined with American oil exports that have reached record highs, all the while the U.S. guarantees the security of this new global oil export architecture by seizing control of the four major energy choke points on the planet. This is why reopening the Strait of Hormuz, the centerpiece of the talks going all the way back to April's Islamabad round and June's 14-point memorandum, is why it's going to carry a lot less weight. Iran's one irreplaceable card is being replaced piece by piece, barrel by barrel, port by port. And that's really the lesson here. You don't have to win every battle to win a war. Sometimes you just make your enemy's best weapon obsolete while your own producers fill every gap they leave behind. That's exactly what's happening right now in real time, from the deserts of the UAE to the oil docks of Corpus Christi, Texas. The world is changing, and in many respects, it's only just beginning. One last thing. Ever wonder why analysts keep getting blindsided by Iran, Russia, or the Middle East? They're missing the theology behind the politics. That's exactly what I unpack in my new book, Civcosm, available now. Order using the link below.